faced no significant opposition in the Dáil because Republicans refused to take their seats until 1927. In this context, the improved welfare of the citizens was not a priority. Most of these men were reared in the Victorian climate of late 19th century middle-class Ireland. And if the rhetoric of some ministers was to be believed, the poor had no one to blame but themselves. The Minister for Local Government, Seamus A. Burke, insisted one of the most serious defects of the Irish character is this dependency of one kind or another. The number of people who lead a parasitic existence was increasing relative to the number of people who are striving to make an honest living. And many of those striving to make an honest living were represented by the trade union movement. But the reality was that the biggest union, the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, was facing bankruptcy. It was collapsing under the pressure of supporting strikes. Internal divisions also further immobilised the trade union movement. The militancy of Jim Larkin, the most recognisable face of trade unionism, had got him expelled from the ITGWU. The Labour Party was also struggling. In 1922, there were 17 Labour TDs. By 1932, there were only 7. The Irish trade union movement was highly fragmented. There was a multiplicity of small unions, or what one observer called sectional suicide. In 1922, membership of the ITGWU was 100,000. In 1926, it was 40,000. In truth, the labour movement had been usurped. The democratic programme was being ignored. The unity of purpose that had brought about independence had been destroyed. Evidence of this was to be seen in the treatment of Republican prisoners after the Civil War. In October 1923, up to 8,000 IRA prisoners went on hunger strike across the country to protest their continued detention by the Irish Free State. A total of over 12,000 Republicans had been interned by May 1923, over 1,000 of them here in Gormanston. 2 men died on the strike, Denny Barry in Newbridge and Andrew O'Sullivan in Mountjoy Jail, before the strike was called off in November 1923. Writer Frank O'Connor observed the post-Civil War reality with despair. He was one of the Republican prisoners interned here by the Free State government, and he identified the point at which his hopes were finally shattered. But the strike dragged on for days before the masterminds of the revolution saw that their organisation was bleeding to death under their eyes and issued a hasty general dispensation. Immediately, the whole camp became hysterical. Even the sentries dropped their rifles and dragged buckets of soup to the barbed wire, and the prisoners tore their hands as they thrust their mugs through it, pushing and shouldering one another out of the way. Some got sick, but came back for more. A tall, spectacled man, who had not been invited to join the strike, came up to me with an oily smile. "Well, Professor," he said gleefully, "the pigs feed." And I turned away in disgust, because that was exactly what the scene resembled. And I knew it was the end of our magical improvisation. There was now a vacuum on the left wing of Irish political life. Neither the Labour Party nor the trade union movement was able to fill it. This left organised labour in a very weak position from the foundation of the state, a position from which it was not to recover for many decades. Some would argue that it never recovered. In the new Ireland, age, location, class and gender would decide an individual's relationship to power. Those on the periphery were to be excluded. The message in 1923 was a brutal one: get on board or be marginalised.
You have my husband. Just tell me where he is.
It was vital that Ireland be seen to be able to run its own social, economic and political affairs. The idea of the self-reliant community now became essential to the official propaganda that promoted this message of political self-sufficiency. But self-reliance and an all-powerful centralised state do not sit easily together. This is how the Minister for Justice, Kevin O'Higgins, saw it. We were standing amidst the ruins of one administration, with the foundations of another not yet built, and wild men screaming through the keyhole.
Gasra Lobig.
Those wild men were owed nothing. 77 of them were executed during the Civil War by the Free State Army. They included Rory O'Connor, who had been best man at O'Higgins's wedding. The new republic would not be socialist. Labour could wait forever as far as Cumann Gael was concerned. The combination of a single-minded focus on power and a fear and distrust of social change did not bode well for the children of the revolution. The Democratic programme had committed Sinn Féin to tackling child poverty. It promised to abolish the present degrading and odious poor law system. In other words, to abolish the workhouses. These were terrifying 19th century institutions, the last refuge of the desperate, the single mother, the orphaned, the aged, the infirm, the destitute. Fear of the workhouse haunted thousands of people living on the margins of Irish society. The workhouse ranked as one of the most hated institutions of British rule in Ireland. Its retention after independence was a sick joke. In Ireland, harsh treatment of children in institutional care was something which was only supposed to happen at the hands of colonial oppressors. In fact, there were very early signs that as far as children were concerned, it was business as usual. This is a copy of a letter that was written by William T. Cosgrave, Minister for Local Government, to his colleague Austin Stack, Minister for Home Affairs, in May 1921, during the War of Independence. People reared in workhouses, as you are aware, are no great acquisition to the community, and they have no ideas whatever of civic responsibilities. As a rule, their highest aim is to live at the expense of the ratepayers. Consequently, it would be a decided gain if they all took it into their heads to emigrate. When they go abroad, they are thrown on their own responsibilities and have to work whether they like it or not. So there you have it, in black and white. It would be easier to hide and export these problems rather than confront them. The new Irish state opted for an institutional model of childcare. The administration of this system was handed over to the Catholic Church. In many ways every bit as harsh as its predecessors, the Catholic Church was also unaccountable. The earliest account we have of what life was like in a post-independence institution is the story of Peter Terrell. His memoir was discovered here in the National Library in 2004 by the historian Dermot Whelan. It was amongst the papers of Owen Sheehy Skeffington, who was a Liberal senator and campaigner against corporal punishment in schools. It was published in 2006 under the title Founded on Fear. Tyrrell sought an answer to a fundamental question. Why did he suffer such vicious abuse in Letterfrack Industrial School between 1924 and 1932? These are some of the letters that he wrote in the 1950s concerning an answer to this question. This is to certify that I, Peter Tyrrell, witnessed and suffered torture and severe beatings from 1924 until 1932 at the Christian Brothers School, Letterfrack, County Galway, Éire. Brothers Walsh, Fahy and Vale were in the habit of taking lads from their beds and beating them naked. And almost all the school period and lessons we were subject to beatings on the head and face. Brother Fahy was equally as cruel and was also a pervert. May I also add that I was a prisoner in the last war in Germany and never met any German guards or Gestapo who were as bad or as cruel as Brother Vale, who always flogged the boys with a heavy piece of solid rubber. Tyrrell was sent here because of poverty, because his parents struggled to feed a family of 10 children. His mother had to borrow and beg, and it was this that brought the family to the attention of the authorities, who petitioned the courts. 6 of the children were put into institutions as a result. Visible evidence of poverty was despised, and it had to be hidden. Hidden in institutions that were sanctioned by the state and run by the religious orders. In the 1950s, Tyrrell sought to bring the Christian Brothers to account for the abuse some of their members had perpetrated on him. Failure to not alone get any answers, but even to get an acknowledgement of the abuse he had suffered, killed him. Convinced that he wasn't believed, Peter Terrell committed suicide on Hampstead Heath in 1967 by setting fire to himself. It took a